Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Mem Daled. Today's daf is sponsored in honor of Dahlia and Jack Levy on the marriage of their son Amitai to Shirley Neumann. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. Wishing everyone a Chatima Tova, and we're going to get started with a quick review of the end of yesterday's daf. Okay, the beginning of today's daf is a little bit confusing, so I'll try to organize as best as possible to not confuse you too much. There's a machloket about a machloket. That's what gets a little bit confusing here. We have a machloket between in a Mishnah in Gittin about we're talking the beginning of today's daf all about a stage of a naara. Okay, that's a girl, if you remember, she's already had signs of puberty, but for the first 6 months she's considered a naara, which is kind of in between a minor. She's not a minor, she has her own knowledge, but she's also not a bogeret. When she's a bogeret, she gets married on her own, not with her father. Okay, her marriage is her own to decide about and all that. But before that, her father can actually betroth her. And the question is, can she even accept her own betrothal or not? Okay, so first there's a machloket. That's our topic for today. But our discussion is going to start from a Mishnah, which is actually talking about a divorce of this girl. Okay, when she's a naara, can she accept her own divorce, or does her father have to accept the divorce for her? Because she's not yet in her own domain, her own reshut, as we say. Her own domain isn't the exact word to use, but does she have full rights to accept a get from the husband or not? That's a machloket Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. The machloket Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is that same machloket true for Kiddushin as well? We know that Kiddushin she's supposed to accept, but the question is, before she's an naara, is her acceptance meaningless because her father does the acceptance on her behalf? Now, this might sound a little horrifying to us, what a father accepts who she's going to be betrothed to, but you have to remember, nowadays, almost nobody gets married at this age, right? We're talking about a very young age, and maybe it does make sense to it that if they're going to betroth her at such a young age, then perhaps it should be the father who's doing it because maybe she doesn't know any better at that point, right? Think about people who have daughters who are 12 or 13 or even sons, right? I mean, sons is a whole different story, but halachically, but think about, would they be capable of making that kind of decision? So there's some sort of understanding that maybe in this case, it's the father who does it on her behalf. So again, when it comes to get, it's very clear that there's a machloket. The question is there a machloket also by Kiddushin? So Rabbi Yehuda says by get, only the father. You can't have two people who are in charge here. Now, everyone agrees that the father can accept the get on her behalf. The question is, does she also have the rights to accept the get herself? The rabbis think she does, either she or her father. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you can't have two people in charge here, just the father accepts the get. So now Reish Lakish is more simple. He just says, same machloket for Kiddushin, it's all the same. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's not the same. The rabbis who said that the naara is allowed to accept her get doesn't think that she can accept Kiddushin. And now the big question becomes why. So at the end of yesterday's daf, we saw that Rabbi Yochanan brings an explanation that we're going to reject, and then instead of saying we disagree with Rabbi Yochanan, we're actually, and this is going to happen twice today, we're going to reread what Rabbi Yochanan is saying and say, oh no, he must not have said that. It doesn't make any sense. He must have said something else. So first, let's review what he said. He explained, my Talmud Rabbi Yochanan, 5 lines from the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. Aliba de Rabbanan. What we have to explain is, why does Rabbi Yochanan think that the rabbis changed their position between get and Kiddushin? Meaning, why would we distinguish between the two? So Gerushin de machneset atzma l'reshut avia. Gerushin puts her back into her father's domain. So the father was always happy to have his daughter back in her house. Okay, right? One might say maybe it's a financial burden for the father, but no, they seem to think he's always happier to have his daughter back home, and therefore she can accept it on her own. But Kiddushin, which removes her from the father's domain, that only her father velohi, not her. To which the Gemara says, but wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense, because we have a Mishnah about maamar. V'harei maamar dimafkat atzma mereshut avia utnan, and it says in the Mishnah, tana mina erusin ein osim b'maamar ela midat avia. It says a ketana from erusin, she can't do, okay, a ketana from, what is a ketana min erusin? We have a minor who is betrothed to somebody, just betrothed, not married yet. The husband, already they call it husband, dies. She's supposed to do, they don't have children yet, she was only betrothed. She's supposed to do yibum with the brother. And we say that, now, you need to know a whole bunch of different things here. What is ma'amar? So the rabbis instituted, and we're going to see this of debate about this, but the main position, which is the rabbis, which we'll start with, because also it sits much better with us, is that the rabbis instituted the maamar, which is basically, I'm going to make a bunch of analogies today. Okay, Kiddushin is to nisuin. Kiddushin is the betrothal, to the nisuin, to the marriage, is like maamar to yibum. Okay, maamar is like a Kiddushin for yibum. Now, yibum by Torah law, there is no Kiddushin. Okay, there is no such thing. It's just yibum, which is he has relations with her. And in fact, there's a drasha, which is very hard to accept, that yibum against her will actually is effective. And they learn that from a pasuk. It says v'yibma, even if she doesn't agree to it, which basically sounds like, right, it's hard to understand this concept. And in fact, the reason why I preface it this way is because this is a response to it. Now, I actually looked up some responses to why yibum ba'al korcha. How could you say this? Basically, that means he could theoretically have relations with her against her will, and she will be, yibum. You could say maybe it just means that she agreed, she consented to the relations, just not for the fulfillment of yibum. But if you really look at it al panav, it looks right at the way it looks like he could actually theoretically even rape her. So many people explain that this just means it's effective. It doesn't mean this is a way to go. This just means that if it were to happen that way, it would actually be effective. It doesn't mean that, right? Obviously, one should never do a mitzvah in that way, and that wouldn't be the right way to do it. It's just, technically speaking, it would be effective because her consent is not needed. It really just means we don't need her consent. But came the rabbis, according to one of the approaches, which is the mainstream approach, which is paskin this way, and instituted ma'amar specifically to avoid this issue, and said, we won't allow this. It has to come with ma'amar first. What is ma'amar? Her agreement. Without her agreement, right, it's like Kiddushin. Kiddushin requires her consent. Without her consent, you can't do yibum. And basically try to avoid this halacha, which they couldn't handle, right? It didn't sit well with them. That's the only, saving grace of this halacha. It's still, you say, why would the Torah say that this is okay? Again, sometimes you have to just look at these things out of context. Like, okay, it's just a matter of, is this type of kinyan, so to speak, need her consent or doesn't? And if you think it doesn't need her consent, well, then that means it can be done against her will, even though that sounds awful. But, okay, so let's put that issue aside. Now, it says here, if she's a minor from Erusin, now, who needs to consent? The father. Her consent is not relevant because she's a k'tana. There is no such thing as consent. V'hana'ara, but if she's a naara, bein midat atzma, bein midat avia. Once she's a naara, she can provide her consent, or the father can provide consent. Now, it says in parentheses here, Moshe Enkim Kiddushin. We're going to ignore those words for right now. They're in parentheses, which means they really don't appear in the Gemara yet, but it will become relevant later. So we'll come back to that. Which means, right, but this isn't true for Kiddushin, okay? But let's put that aside right now. So what do you see here? Ma'amal, which removes her from the father's domain, because again, what happened when the husband died, she went back to her father's domain, and now the yibum is going to remove her from the father's domain. So if she can do it herself, then that's obviously not the reason for Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said if it's removing her from the father, she has no rights to agree. So it's only the father can agree. So therefore, like I said, they're going to change what Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said to explain Rabbi Yochanan's approach. Ela itmar hachi itmar. If this is what Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina said, it must have been something else because it makes no sense that he would say this, being that that's the situation. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, and it's based on this Mishnah about maamar. My time de Rabbi Yochanan aliba de Rabbanan. What's the reason? Now we're going to change it. The difference is not one removes her from the father's domain and one brings her back. It's the Kiddushin de midata aviv Elohi. Gerushin de ba'al korcha bein he bein avua. Kiddushin is done with her consent. Now, who has to consent when she's an naara? You need the father because she's not old enough, so to speak. Even though she's an naara, we still maybe don't trust her when it comes to the Kiddushin issue. So she's in her father's domain for this purpose. And therefore, since her consent is necessary, it can't be her, it has to be her father. But Gerushin de ba'al korcha, but when it comes to divorce, she can accept the get because the get can be done against her will. Remember, this is something Rabbeinu Gershom changes hundreds of years later. But in the time of the Mishna and the Gemara, Gittin, divorce can be done against her will. As long as she receives it, she doesn't have to want to receive it. But if he gives her the get is a get. And therefore, since we don't really need consent, so it doesn't matter if she accepts it or her father does. So therefore, bein hi bein avia. So that seems like a much better explanation. However, it also doesn't fit with that source we quoted about ma'amal. Hare ma'amal de midata, but ma'amal is also, what did we just say about ma'amar? The whole point of ma'amal is that it's like Kiddushin, and it has to be done with her consent. So how can you say, based on what you just offered as a distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin, is that ma'amar is much more like Kiddushin than Gerushin? It also needs her consent. And then why would the naara be allowed to be the one to consent? Bekatane, and it says there, bein hi bein avia. So the answer to this is, and now I did preface this by saying that's only one explanation as to ma'amal. Well, there's a dissenting opinion there about ma'amal. Ma'amar, according to Rebbe, can also be done against her will, and that he would have to say the ma'amar was instituted for a different reason, not in order to avoid this problem that the man might betroth her against, might do yibum against her will. But both the ma'amar and the yibum can be done against her will. And therefore, this source that we quoted before about the ketana, which said that the ketana can't do ma'amal only with the father, which implied, right, and then it said, and the naara could do it herself. Well, that must be only according to Rebbe. And then Rabbi Yochanan fits perfect, because Rabbi Yochanan says, in any situation where you don't need her consent, which would be yibum, ma'amar, according to Rebbe, then the woman can actually accept it even when she's a naara. Now, how do we know this opinion of Rebbe? Now we're going to go a little bit into this machloket Rebbe and the rabbis about ma'amar in general, which is just to support this explanation, saying that that previous source is just Rebbe and that's how it resolves it. Tanya, as it says in a braita, if you do ma'amar against her will, Rebbe Omer kana, Rebbe says this is effective. Lo kana. And the rabbis say, it isn't. My time of Rebbe. What is the basis for his opinion that ma'amar can be done against her will? Gamar bi'adi yevama. He says, well, if ma'amar is an action that you do before yibum, well, then we're going to compare it to yibum. So bi'ah of a yevama, we're going to learn it from having relations with a yevama, which basically affects the kinyan. We're going to say ma bi'adi yevama ba'al korcha, since that can be even without her consent. So the maamar can also be without her consent. And then again, that just explains that source. But the rabbis hold Yalfinami Kiddushin. No, we don't learn ma'amar from the bia of Yibum. We learn ma'amar from Kiddushin. Remember our analogy. Ma'amar is to Yibum as Kiddushin is to Nisuin. So if ma'amar is to Yibum is the pre and Kiddushin is the pre to the marriage, well, then it has to be just like Kiddushin. Ma Kiddushin demidata, av hachanami demidata. Just like Kiddushin has to be with her consent, also the maamar has to be with her consent. What's really the root of the machloket? Well, Rebbe Savar, mile yevama, yevama havalei melech, and Rabbanan Sabri Kiddushin havalei melech. By the way, we saw this whole sugya in yevama. It might sound a little familiar, it might not, but it might. So Rebbe says we're going to learn yibum issues from yibum issues. Maamar is something the rabbis created to be for yibum. Well, then we're going to learn the details of it from the details of Yibum itself. If Yibum can be done without her consent, then Ma'amar also. And the rabbi said, no, it has to do with, it's a type of Kiddushin. So we're going to learn Kiddushin from Kiddushin, the Ma'amar, which is like Kiddushin from Kiddushin. And therefore, we're going to get to the conclusion that you need her consent. So that was all just to explain the machloket Rebbe and the rabbis, but this was all to say that source that we brought to question, the theory, the Rabbi Yochanan says it all has to do with, do we need her consent? Do we not need her consent? If we don't need her consent, then naara can do it. Well, why does ma'amar then in that category? That's because this source must follow Rebbe, who disagrees with the mainstream opinion, basically, and the one that we hold on. But you could say the Mishnah follows his opinion. And hachinami mistabra could commentary to Rabbi Yochanan, and also we can further support Rabbi Yochanan's reading of this. Midikatane seifa masha ein kem b'kiddushin. Well, it says in the end of that source. Now we're going to read what was in parentheses before, which is not true for Kiddushin. So now, why would that be? Because, again, if we're going to compare it, we're going to say, according to Rebbe, Ma'amar is different from Kiddushin, right? Kiddushin, this is different. Ma'amar, it's right. Ma'amar is like Yibum and not like Kiddushin. So it makes sense. Well, then if that's the way we read this source, that it's all Rebbe, and right, Masha'en came Kiddushin comes to say we're going to distinguish. Masha'en came Kiddushin really supports Rabbi Yochanan. I should have said it better. I'll say it now. This says basically the naara bein midat atzma bein midat aviha, which is not true for Kiddushin, which is only midat atzma. Now, that means, only midat aviha. Sorry, I just said that wrong. Now, a naara cannot do Kiddushin. Now, that's exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said, right? Again, assuming, now this Mishnah holds like Rebbe, but we assume in our machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis can't remember. Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis say, can the woman accept her get when she's a naara? And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish have a debate, right? Did they debate this issue also in Kiddushin? Or, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they all agree in Kiddushin, this doesn't work. So now, if that Mishnah, we assume, doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda, but the mainstream opinion about the Kiddushin part, so now it fits perfectly with Rabbi Yochanan, because it says here, a naara can accept her, she can do maamar, but she can't do Kiddushin. So there you have, that's Rabbi Yochanan according to the rabbis. According to Reish Lakish, you would have to say that's Rabbi Yehuda, which in a minute, that's how we'll answer it. But right now, we're going to say, right, the assumption is that that follows the mainstream opinion. Right now, again, it's kind of funny because it doesn't follow the mainstream opinion about maamar. It only follows Rebbe, but we should assume on this marriage issue, Masha'en Kiddushin, it would match the mainstream opinion. Also, remember, Rebbe and machloket between Rabbi Yehuda are two different, right? They're two totally different machlokot and two different people. Rabbi Yehuda, by the way, Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah or in the braita in general is Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Eli. It's not the same Rabbi Yehuda. So now they're going to say, Amar Reish Lakish, Amari Rabbi Yehuda. So now that's the obvious answer. Don't worry about this being a question of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish will just say, this, it says the Kiddushin, only the father can do it, not the naara. Right, that last few words, Masha'en can be Kiddushin, this doesn't work for Kiddushin, that would be Rabbi Yehuda. Ta'amar ein shtei yadayim zochot ke'echad. To which they say, remember, now where did Rabbi Yehuda say that? In divorce, right? And then we just applied it to Kiddushin. So now they say, well, Rabbi Yehuda, Masha'en can be Kiddushin, Masha'en can be Gerushin b'bayli. The chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda is, even in get, it doesn't work, right? Because remember, in Kiddushin, it's easier to say, because Rabbi Yochanan thought even the rabbis agree that it's only an naara. It should have brought the bigger chiddush, Masha'en can be Gerushin. So to say this to Rabbi Yehuda, and he says Masha'en can be Kiddushin, he should have said Masha'en can be Gerushin. Say no, inachinam. No. It theoretically maybe Kiddushin is the bigger chiddush. Gerushin is the bigger chiddush. That in Gerushin she can't accept her own get, right? Even though, remember, it's against her will, and you would have thought she could anyway, or since it could be against her will, you don't really need her consent. Therefore, maybe it would have been okay. But that is a bigger chiddush. But why in this source does it specifically mention Kiddushin? Well, it makes sense in the context. What are they talking about? Ma'amal, which is compared to Kiddushin. So I did ditani ma'amal didame leKiddushin. If they wrote Kiddushin, because Kiddushin is like ma'amar. So while it's true, Rabbi Yehuda says it also in Gerushin, it makes sense that specifically they talked about Kiddushin in this context. And therefore, Tanana, right? I did Tani Ma'amar, did Dami the Kiddushin, since it was talking about Ma'amar, which is like Kiddushin, Tananami Masha'en came be Kiddushin. Okay, so now we have basically, we're going to say, since Ma'amar is like Kiddushin, so this is going to be, it mentioned Masha'en came be Kiddushin. There's one last question, then I'll go back and summarize. Rabbi Yehuda, Mishna Ma'amal. So then what's the difference? If Rabbi Yehuda thinks that she can't get her get, and she can't get her own Kiddushin, why is she allowed to accept her own ma'amal? To which they answer, well, that's because ma'amar is a whole different ballgame. Ma'amal, she already got betrothed by her father, presumably, to somebody else, right, to this husband. The husband dies, and then she falls to yibum. Now, already the father consented, right? You can almost say it like this. When you marry anybody, you know that there's a potential you're going to have to do yibum. So therefore, the maamar doesn't need her consent like Kiddushin, meaning the father's consent, because the father already consented in the beginning to the brother. So therefore, we can assume he knew already, and she's already connected to the brother. In other words, there's a much stronger connection between her and the brother, who she's supposed to yibum with, than her and her husband in the first place before they got betrothed at all. And she's basically he's the only one she could be with right now, unless he releases her with chalitza. So therefore, the maamar doesn't really require the same type of consent as Kiddushin does, and that's why he distinguishes. So let's just stop for a minute before we're going to go on a little bit more about this, but let's stop and summarize. So again, we started with this machloket, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, about whether, right? What's confusing here is there's machlokot within machlokot. So we started with this machloket. Does the father have any rights? Does the father have exclusive rights, to receive her get? That was Rabbi Yehuda. The rabbi said, no, she can also receive her get. Then we had a machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Does the same apply for Kiddushin as well? Is it the same machloket? Reish Lakish says exact same machloket. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, it's not the same machloket. By Kiddushin, for sure, she can't be the one to accept it. The father has to accept it. To which we brought this source from about maamar and said that seems to contradict our theory, right? First, we brought this first explanation of Rabbi Yochanan that it's going in and out of marriage. Well, maamar didn't work with that. Okay, that if she goes out, the father needs to consent, but also with yibum, she goes out. Then we said, okay, so it must be something else. So we said it must be, does it need her consent or not? And then we said, well, how do we explain maamar? Oh, that maamar source must be just Rebbe, who thinks that maamar is actually more like get, because it doesn't require her consent. But don't worry, it's not the mainstream opinion. In other words, it's just, don't question me with that source. That source follows Rebbe. Then we said, well, if that source follows Rebbe, then what are we doing? And then the source said, Masha Ein Ken B'Kiddushin, which clearly said, oh, a naara can't accept her own Kiddushin, which matches Rabbi Yochanan. So then they threw it back on Reish Lakish and said, well, how do you read that line, Masha Ein Ken B'Kiddushin? And he said, oh, that doesn't bother me because, yes, it's true. I think the rabbis would say that the naara can do Kiddushin and it's the same as maamar. But this source follows Rabbi Yehuda, who said that just like in get, she can't accept her get, she also can't accept Kiddushin. So Rabbi Yochanan had to explain according to Rabbi, and Reish Lakish had to explain it according to Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, those are two different machlokot. That's where it makes it a little confusing. And then we said, well, why would there be a distinction here? And why, if it's Rabbi Yehuda, who's clear, the naara can't do anything, why does he allow maamar? That's because she's already zikukav omed. Okay, she's already kind of attached to him in the first place. So now the Gemara points out, and that was our review. Now the Gemara points out, if you're already going to say maamar is different, well, remember our first question was, well, if you're going to say that Rabbi Rabbi Chanina's explanation was the Kiddushin removes her from the father, and therefore you need the father to agree. And then we said, well, that whole theory is disproven because of maamar. You could have actually answered it in the same way. That Rabbi Yochanan nami lo tikshalach meikara. The first question we had on that explanation of Rabbi Yochanan, we could answer. Shane ma'amar ho iluzukukav omedit. If we're already going to say ma'amar is a whole different beast because she's already connected to him, well, then you could have answered that in the beginning and gone back to the first explanation of Rabbi Yochanan that maybe it does have to do with releasing her from his property or not really, right? And that Gittin, which is bringing her back to the father, she could do herself because it's always in his best interest, but releasing her from the father, not. But maamar would be something different because it's a whole different thing because she's already connected to him from the first marriage of her husband and or the first betrothal, and therefore it doesn't, right? You can't use it as a comparison. So that's another just point they make on the side. Now, we're going back to Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, same machloket there as is here. Okay, so the rabbis who say that a woman can accept her get, she can accept her Kiddushin, right, this naara, and Rabbi Yehuda who says, Ein shtei yadayim zochot ke'echad, only her father can accept the get. Okay, that's for Kiddushin as well. But basically, the mainstream opinion holds that by Kiddushin, she can accept her own get. Well, now we're going to question that from our Mishnah. T'nan, right? Our first question was, how can Rabbi Yochanan say that in Kiddushin, she can't accept, that even the rabbis would say she can't. Now we're going to deal with, wait, Reish Lakish says in Kiddushin, it's so clear she can accept her get according to the rabbis, but that disagrees with our Mishnah. Okay, so now we get back to our topic, which is our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Ha'ish makadesh pito kashi naara bo b'shlucha. It says a man can betroth his daughter when she's a naara. Either he could do it directly, or he could do it with an agent. Bo b'shlucha in, ba b'shlucha lo. But wait, that says he can do it with his agent, or messenger. She can't, though. Notice, it doesn't say she can do it. It only says the father can. Our Mishnah seems to say she can't do Kiddushin. That would match Rabbi Yochanan, because we assume our Mishnah is the mainstream opinion of the rabbis. Again, that's always a question. Maybe it doesn't. That's what we'll get to. But right now, assuming usually our Mishnah follows the majority opinion, it seems to imply she can't accept her Kiddushin. Only the father can. Tiyuv to Reish Lakish. This seems to go against Reish Lakish, who thought that the rabbis allow it. Reish Lakish could answer, Hanami Rabbi Yehuda. Again, we're doing the same thing. Oh, our Mishnah must follow Rabbi Yehuda. But they're going to have a problem with this. Okay, so right now we're going to assume our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda said, right? You can't have two people, right, being in charge. Only the father by get. And according to Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yehuda would say the same thing in Kiddushin. And therefore, the Mishnah, which doesn't allow the naara to do the Kiddushin herself, must be Rabbi Yehuda. But the problem is that if you want to say our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, then it has to, we view the Mishnah as a continuum. Now, many times we do say, oh, wait, this Mishnah is that person, that Mishnah is that person. We do that when we're stuck. But normally, and if we can avoid it, we say that Mishnah is a continuum of opinions. We're now going to look at the next Mishnah, something totally different, and show that that Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. If that Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda, then our Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yehuda. That's their assumption. So again, if they had no other answer, they would just say, oh, this Mishnah is this person, that Mishnah is someone else, and live with it. But here they're going to have a different solution, and therefore we'll eventually get it. Can you really hold this Mishnah as Rabbi Yehuda? It says at the end of our Mishnah, a man goes over to a woman and he says, betroth me with this date, betroth me with this date, betroth me with this date. He gives her a few dates, one after the other, and with each one he says, betroth me with this. What do? We check if in one of the dates at least, okay, it has to be one date, has a value of a pruta, then it'll work, right? And we all know you could go buy dates in different stores, different qualities. So there's some that really aren't worth a lot, and there's some that are much better than others. So each one has to be looked at individually. We don't view this as a continuum because he said each time, betroth me with this, betroth me with this, betroth me with this. But if he said, betroth me with this, gives her a date, and then he says, and with this, and gives her another date, and with this, and gives her another date, well, then we view it as a continuum, and all the dates together have to be a pruta. And if each one individually isn't, it doesn't matter. She could still be betrothed as long as we look at them as one entity. So we're going to now prove that that's not Rabbi Yehuda's approach from a totally different topic. But Amrina, they say about that Mishnah, Man Tana Hitkachi Hitkachi. Who's the Tana who says that each time you say Hitkachi, we're going to basically say these are totally separate incidents, and therefore there has to be a Shefa Pruta in one of them, otherwise she's not betrothed. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi says it's Rabbi Shimon. This is a totally different topic in Masechet Shvuot. Somebody takes an oath and says, let's say you all claim I owe you money, and I say I don't owe you, and you, and you, and you, and you, I swear. Okay, I say I swear I don't owe you, and you, and you, and you. If I lied about this, and I really owe you all money, then I have to, the question is, do I have to bring a korban for each lie, or just one for the whole lie? So Rabbi Shimon is going to say the exact same thing as here, which is if I said shvua, that I owe you, that I don't owe you anything, and then I said, and I take an oath that I don't owe you, and then I say, and I take an oath that I don't owe you, then I'm liable for each one separately. You have to bring a korban up for this case. Okay, it's korban alevi yochid. You bring a sliding scale offering. But if I say, I swear that I don't owe you, and you, and you, and you, and you, since I only used one language, we're going to view the whole thing as one, and I only have to bring one sacrifice. So that's going to be Rabbi Shimon, which is going to match this. Okay, so Ad Shiomar, it's Rabbi Shimon who says, Ad Shiomar Shvuah l'chol echad echad. Unless I said the word, I'm taking an oath for each one of you separately, I'm not liable separately, right? We view it as one continuum. If I said oath, 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 oath each time, then I'm liable separately. Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe you say, well, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, and that next Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, maybe Rabbi Yehuda. Ubiprate savarlak Rabbi Shimon. Maybe he holds like Rabbi Shimon in that sugya there in Shvuot. Can't possibly be because we know he doesn't. Okay, we're going to now see Misarla. Does he really hold like him? There's a braita there in Shvuot that says, Zeh klal. This is the rule. Klal eno chayav el echad. Prat chayav al kol echad ve'echad divrei Rabbi Meir. I'm not going to deal with Rabbi Meir. There's big machloket in the Gemara there in Shvuot Lamed Chet. What exactly Rabbi Meir means by klal, what he means by prat, he's got a unique opinion. We're going to wait till we get to Shvuot. Rabbi Yehuda on there. That's what we wanted here. Shvuah lo lecha lo lecha lo lecha lo lecha lo lecha. right? One word of shvua, and I then mention all of you. Each one is viewed separately, even though I didn't say shvua each time. That clearly doesn't match what we just said about hitkatshi, because we distinguish between whether you said hitkatshi each time, or you just said hitkatshi with this, with that. And therefore, it's clearly not Rabbi Yehuda. In any case, we're still reading this braita. Rabbi Elazar, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that there could be a way that you said lo lecha, where you're obligated for each lie, but only if you said shvua at the end. You said, I take an oath for you and you and you and you that no your money, then we view it all as one continuum. But if you said the word oath at the end, on you and you and you and you, I take an oath, that is read as I take an oath for you, I take an oath for you, I take an oath for you, I take an oath for you. Again, this is not really connected to our topic. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon says, no, you're only liable if you say, I take an oath for you, I take an oath for you, I take an oath for you. And there you see that Shmuel and Rabbi Yehuda don't agree on this topic. So you can't possibly say that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon on that, and that the next Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda also. So now we're stuck, because this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, that Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon. To which they answer, Ela kula Rabbi Shimon. We say, the next Mishnah is clearly Rabbi Shimon, that we know. So let's just say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon and holds like Rabbi Yehuda about the issue of the daughter, okay? That Ba'u b'shlucha doesn't work, she and her agent doesn't work, only for the father it works, and that matches Rabbi Yehuda, and we don't know that Rabbi Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda about this, so let's just assume that Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and now we have a way to read our Mishnah. And that's the way, again, this is only according to Reish Lakish. Okay, according to Tanakama, remember, Kiddushin, the daughter has no say no matter what, and that matches perfectly with our Mishnah, okay, even according to the rabbis. Now we have two stories. Rabbi Asi lo ala be midrash, actually one story, but but two things about this story. Rabbi Asi one day didn't go into the beit midrash. Eshkachel Rabbi Zera, so he finds Rabbi Zera, he wants to know, did I miss out on anything? Amarle, my amor ha'idna be midrash, what was said in the beit midrash today? Amarle, ab analo ayle. Rabbi Zera said, I didn't make it either to the beit midrash today. Rabbi Avin who died, but Rabbi Avin went to the beit midrash, and he told me, chevruta kula ki Rabbi Yochanan. An interesting thing happened today, right? Chaval, you missed out today. He said, you know what happened today? Everybody got up and ruled like Rabbi Yochanan. That basically a father cannot accept Kiddushin for a naara. I'm sorry, father is the only one who can accept Kiddushin for a naara. She cannot do it herself. And in fact, when they did that, Savach Reish Lakish ki kruchia, he screamed like a crane, and he got really angry that nobody held like him. He started screaming at everybody, not because he was upset that they didn't listen to him, but he said, isn't it so obvious to you? We've talked about this already a lot of times in the Masechet. We compare all things about Gerushin and Kiddushin. And therefore, if there's a machloket for Gerushin, there's a machloket for Kiddushin. And how could you possibly say this? But nobody listened to him. Very sad, right? You can imagine the scene. Amarle. So he responds and he says, the first Rabbi Asi says, Avin bar Samchu, Rabbi Avin bar Samchu, can we rely on the fact that he said this? To which he answered, Amarle. Rabbi Zera answered him, it's like when you take the fish right from the water and you put him right in the frying pan, fresh fish, straight from the water. Well, that's like this. He came straight out of the beit midrash. I saw him right when he walked out. There's no way he got confused about it, right? Maybe tomorrow, the next day, he forgot, got a little confused, but no way that he confused this issue. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Analo Rabbi Avin bar Bichia, v'lo Rabbi Avin bar Kana. By the way, this Rabbi Avin they're talking about is not Rabbi Avin bar Chia. It's not Rabbi Avin bar Kana. Ela Rabbi Avin stam. He's the Rabbi Avin who's known to just be called Rabbi Avin, not with any father's name. L'mayin afkamina. Why do we care? L'mirma didei adidei. Because if we ever find that he said something different, then we'd have to say, oh, there's a contradiction between what he said here and what he said there. And there, maybe he said somewhere else, we don't hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Here, we said very clearly, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan. So that's why you need to know exactly who said it. Okay, that's an interesting end to this section. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question. We're back to get, okay? And a naara and a get. So we know there's this machloket, but we saw that according to the rabbis, she could accept her own get. Naara, ma'u she'taseh shaliach lekabel gita miyad ba'ala. Ki yad v'yadamya, o kechatzer v'yadamya. So he's going to have a question. We're actually going to have two separate questions, two separate explanations about what the question is. So the first, just like we have with Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, we reinterpreted his words because it didn't make sense. Here also we're going to reinterpret the question. So first we think the question means like this. So now the woman, the naara, can she make a shaliach to accept her get? Do we view her kiyada v'yadamya, like the hand of her father? What does this mean? Ma avia mishaveh shaliach, akinami mishaveh shaliach. She's basically an extension of her father. She functions exactly like the father. In other words, we have two equal possibilities. She can get it, or she's like the hand of the father, and just like the father can appoint a shaliach, she can also appoint a shaliach. O Dilma kechatzer v'yadamya. Now, if you learn Gittin, you know that you can put the get in the courtyard of the woman. She doesn't have to actually accept it physically with her hand. You can put it in her domain, and that will be an acceptance of the get. So is it the reason why the daughter herself can accept the get is because we view the daughter as the domain of the father. And then that would mean that she can accept it midin chatzer, but that would mean that she can't appoint a shaliach. You can't appoint a shaliach to be an inanimate object, right? She's viewed kind of as an inanimate object, as just a place where she can accept the get on behalf of the father, really. Because the father's really the one in charge because she's only a naara. So do we say, and then what would be the relevance? Well, she sent a shaliach, right? She's not divorced unless the get comes to her hand, not to her shaliach's hand. Remember, we learned that a woman in general can appoint a shaliach l'kabbalah to accept the get on her behalf. Is that only when she's a bogeret? But if she's a naara, maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe it would have to go to her father or father's messenger, or her directly, but not through an agent. There's no way Rava is deliberating about this. Rava said, Katav get unitano biyad avda. Now we're going to talk about how chatzer works. If you, right now, you can put it in her domain. That would work. What if you put it on her eved, her servant? Yashen u'mishamarto hareze get. If he's sleeping, and what you need, one of the criteria for a chatzer, for the woman, it has to be a chatzer mishtameret. If it's a chatzer that's like an open space and anyone can come in there and take it, then you can't say she accepted the get because maybe someone will just throw it out or something. So now, and then she really never got the get. So if he's sleeping and he's kind of at her domain and under her protection, well, then hareze get, that would count because he's kind of an inanimate object while he's sleeping, and therefore she's got the rule over him, okay? Meaning she's watching over him and he's sleeping, so it's as if it got into her domain. But ne'or ain't no get. But if he's awake, then he can accept the get and he can just tear it up and throw it in the garbage. So that means that it's not like the get really got to her domain. Ne'or amai no get, so why doesn't it work? This is a courtyard that's not protected by her, basically. He is his own person. He's not an inanimate object. When he's sleeping, he kind of is. But when he's awake, he can do whatever he wants. And therefore, he's not really under her domain. Even though she's the master, it still doesn't really help. So, so it can't possibly be that she's viewed as the chatzer of her father, because it would be the same thing. Again, we're going to do analogy, right? The woman in charge of the slave is like the father in charge of the woman, if we're going to view the woman as a din of chatzer. It's like, right, if it really in the end really needs to get to the father and it's just that it's in the father's domain, well, she can't be considered a chatzer mishtameret according to him because she's her own person. So, and she has dat. Remember, she's not a ketana. If she was a minor, then maybe you could say that, but she's got her own knowledge and capability. So therefore, clearly it works midin yad. So then what's his question? Well, what he really wanted to know is, even if she's considered like an extension of the father and she basically can accept the get just like he can accept the get, still, is it 50% or 100%? Meaning, right, is she as strong as the father? She can accept it just like the father can accept it. Midin yad, not midin chatzer, okay, because that wouldn't work. But does she have enough power to actually appoint a shaliach or not? To which he interestingly answers, ein osa shaliach. She cannot appoint an agent to accept the get on her behalf. So what does that mean? So the Meiri points out there's two ways to read this actually. You can say this means she actually cannot appoint a shaliach at all. Okay? Meaning if she appoints a shaliach, it's no good. If she's accepting the get, it has to come directly from the husband or the husband's messenger. But according to some, it means that she can appoint a shaliach. It's just not, remember we learned in get, there's shaliach holacha, the husband appoints a shaliach, and then the get is not a get till it goes to the woman, or to appointed shaliach of the woman. Well, if she's a naara and you say ein shaliach, it could mean she could still appoint a shaliach to go accept her get. She doesn't have to actually get it physically in her hands, but from the husband or from the husband's messenger. But when her shaliach goes and accepts the get, she's not actually divorced until the messenger brings her the actual get. And when she gets the get from the messenger, then she's divorced. As long as she hasn't gotten it, the husband, what's the real important thing? Well, the husband can basically change his mind about it and take it back from her shaliach or cancel it and say, this is not a get. So the question is, when is the get effective? So but the main point being is she's not as strong as the father, according to Rav Nachman, and can't, right? That's Rav Nachman's answer to this question, can't appoint a shaliach, to which the Gemara says, wait a minute. This seems to contradict the Mishnah in Gittin, 18. Ktana, Shamra, hitkabel li giti, eno get ad sheyagia get liyada. Now, what does it say here? A minor who says to a messenger, appoints a shaliach, appoints an agent to get her get. It's not a get until she receives it. Why? Because a ktana, in general, can't appoint an agent because they don't have enough dad on their own. They can't appoint an agent. What does that seem to imply? Ha naara hares a get. But if it was a naara, already where she does have dad, it would sound like she could appoint a shaliach and it would be a get. That goes against what we just said. When does this work? Now, by the way, this whole sugya we've been learning about what is a naara capable of doing is only when she has a father. If a naara doesn't have a father, then of course, all of this she could do by herself because there's no father above her. It's only when there's a father above her. So they say, when this is saying, if there's no father in the family, the ktana can't send a messenger to get her get, but a naara could. But now they say, how could you possibly say this Mishnah is referring to someone where there's no father? Because look at the next line. But if the father said, go and get a get from my daughter, then, right, even if she's a ktana, the husband can't change his mind once it gets to the hands of the shaliach, because the father can appoint a shaliach. So it seems clear, Michal Deresha, but yesh la'avaskina. Well, since the Mishnah in the second line is talking about someone who has a father, it must be in the beginning it's talking about someone who has a father, and then that really seems to contradict what Rav Nachman just said. To which they answer, oh no, you don't have to say that. It's missing words, and this is how you should read the Mishnah. So a ktana appointed a shaliach, it doesn't work. But if she was an naara, it would be a get. She could appoint a shaliach, which again, right, that we're going to have to say that's only if she has no father. Otherwise, it doesn't work with Rav Nachman, who said she can't appoint a shaliach. You'd have to add these words. Well, when does this apply? When she doesn't have a father. Aval yesh la'av, and here's the transition to the second part. But if she had a father, it would only work if the father does it. Okay, and then that's how you would read the braita, the Mishnah, and that's how it fits with Rav Nachman. So basically, Rav Nachman says a naara can't make a shaliach if she has no father, and obviously that and everything else we've been learning about a naara wouldn't be true if she has no father. If she has no father, well, she has dad, and she doesn't have a father above her. So of course, all these things are done by her, no matter what. Now we get to okay. So you're asking about a minor boy. So first of all, there's no stage of na'arut by a boy. And when a boy is a katan, there's no marriage at all. A boy can only marry himself to someone, right? He can betroth a woman by himself, and he can only do it when he's already of age. Okay, so there's no discussion by a boy. It's not relevant. Itmar. By the way, this whole thing about Kiddushin, okay, for a minor, is all to protect the girls. And that's why also it's a discussion by girls. The whole reason this whole thing of Kiddushin Ketana came up is because they wanted to prevent girls. Well, it really comes up, it's by Torah law, okay? But if there's no father, we're going to talk about this right now, the mother or the brother can actually betroth her, or she could get betrothed by herself. That betrothal is only by rabbinic law, and the reason the rabbis instituted it was that they were worried about girls becoming hefker, like being left on the street, and people might rape them or seduce them or something like that, and therefore they wanted to protect them, right? This is hard for us to understand. They're so young, but in those days, apparently that was a concern, and therefore they instituted that when the father's not there and there's no Kiddushin by Torah law, we had to institute Kiddushin by rabbinic law so that we could protect these girls from being on the street, which again, doesn't really apply anymore, but that's how you can understand a little bit this idea of Kiddushin Ketana. So now we have a machloket about what if a ktana shenitkadsha shelo l'dat aviyah. She gets betrothed without her father's knowledge. And then her father finds out and he's silent and he doesn't say anything. How do we understand his silence? So Amar Shmuel, tzricha get, b'tzricha miyun. If she wants to get married to somebody else, she needs to get a get and she needs to do refusal. You might remember refusal. This is in the case, like I said, where the brother or the mother betroths her because the father's not there anymore, or she betroths herself as a minor. There's Kiddushin on a rabbinic level, and she can easily get out of it. When she becomes of age, she could say, I don't want to be in this marriage, and she leaves. And there's no get required at all. That's because it's only Kiddushin by rabbinic law. So Shmuel says she needs a get and she needs miyun, which we don't really understand yet. Amar karna dvarim bego, im get lama miyun, miyun lama get. Miyun ends a marriage and get ends a marriage, but you don't need both. In other words, either you say she's betrothed by Torah law, in which case she needs a get, or she's betrothed by rabbinic law, in which case she doesn't need a get, and miyun's enough. So I don't understand what you're saying. So Amruleh Hamar Ukvu Beitina B'Kafre. Right? There's more Ukva in his beit in Kafre. Why don't you go there and figure out what the story is? Afchua. Now, when they brought this to Mar Ukva, they flipped who said what. And then Rav heard, Shadua Lakamei de Rav, they sent it to Rav, Amarlu, Elohim, Tzricha Gedu, Tzricha Miyun, B'chasli Lizari de Abba Barabba de Neymar Hachim. He says, number one, she needs a get and she needs miyun. And number two, there's no way that Shmuel said what you said. He said, and it's true because they messed it up. They said that Shmuel said what Karna said, and really Rav and Shmuel agree about this issue. And Rav is saying there's no way that Abba Bar Abba, which is Shmuel, would ever say that what you said he said. So now, Amar Va'acha Bered Rabbi Yehuda will end with this explanation. Tzricha get. Why does she need get and miyun? Well, she needs a get shema nitratzeh ha'av b'kiddushin. Because maybe when the father was silent, maybe he said, oh, that's good with me. In which case he was agreeing, right? We normally say shtika kodah. He was agreeing, and therefore, since he was agreeing, well, that then gives it validity by Torah law, and she needs to get out of it. But why tzricha miyun? Because we don't really know what the father was thinking. Shema lo nitratzeh ha'av b'kiddushin. Maybe he didn't agree to the kiddushin, in which case, what's the problem? Well, the problem is they'll see she got a get, and they'll think that she's really divorced by Torah law. And if he wants to go marry her sister, okay, that's what we're going to see right now. If he wants to go marry her sister, now he can't marry the sister of your divorcee unless the girl dies. But if she didn't die, then he can't marry her sister. So if he goes and betroths the sister, what will happen? The rabbis will say, he was divorced from the first one, which means this isn't a valid marriage at all, and she's not actually married. But since it's actually a doubt, and we don't know, maybe she was betrothed. Maybe he wasn't married to the first one at all, because maybe it was only rabbinic. Maybe the father's silence isn't viewed as consent. Then if he wasn't married to the first one, then he actually could marry the sister. And then the Kiddushin would be a valid Kiddushin. So if he goes ahead after this first marriage, gives her a get just in case, and nothing else, they'll think that it was a Torah marriage. If he were to go and marry her sister, they would say, oh, that's not a valid marriage, and they wouldn't require a divorce, and then the sister would go marry someone else, and that actually would have been a valid divorce if, in fact, because of the safek, that maybe the father really didn't agree. And therefore, they require miyun, so that people understand here that there's a possibility of both being, that it might have only been a rabbinic marriage, and it could be the father never really agreed to it. And the last line for today, Amar Rav Nachman b'hu sheshitcho. The only real concern that the father would have agreed to the marriage that would require this get, according to what we're saying, is only if they had discussed already betrothal beforehand. If there had been no discussion of betrothal beforehand, then we have no reason to believe that the father took seriously at all what the girl was doing. Why was he silent? Because he just felt like, oh, it's a girl just playing around and doing things, and it's obviously irrelevant, and he just ignored it. And that, okay, so he says it's only if there was talk already if there was going to be Kiddushin. But if there was no talk before, this wouldn't be relevant at all. Tomorrow we'll see Ulu has a whole different approach to this. So we'll end here for today. So what we did today, quick review, even though it's very late. We started with this machloket, Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish, and then kind of tried to figure out with this other source about maamar, trying to figure out what really is the reason for Rabbi Yochanan, and then how does Reish Lakish work in with that other source we saw? How does it work in with our Mishnah? It seems to go against our Mishnah. So again, each time we had to explain it's according to a particular approach, each source. Then we had that they paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, even though Reish Lakish got very upset about it. Then we had this question of Rava. He asked Rav Nachman about a naara, can she be a shaliach? In the end, we had to explain two different ways to understand the question. And then Rav Nachman says she actually can't be a shaliach. And then we brought a question on that from a Mishnah, and then we resolved the question. And then we moved on to this other machloket about a minor who accepts a kiddushin, and her father hears but doesn't say anything, silent. How do we understand his silence? We saw that Rav and Shmuel both saw. We really saw that main opinion today. Karna, who didn't really get it, but we saw one main opinion. Tomorrow we'll see Ulla. Rav and Shmuel both say she needs Gittin, she needs miyun, just so that people understand this is a suffix situation. We don't really know what the father was thinking, and therefore we have to be concerned for all possibilities. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day, and again, Chatima Tova.